Hi, this is Mimi.
And this is Lee. In this episode of Beyond Dieting, we talk about how you are not broken when you eat something you enjoy. And most likely, you are on track 99% of the time.
So why are we talking about this? And really, it's because this is one of the ideas and things that we hear from our clients so often. And they don't typically phrase it as like I'm broken, although sometimes they'll phrase it that way, but it often is more like I just can't seem to stick to anything. I just can't stay on track. I'm not doing the things that I know I'm supposed to be doing. And then they really believe that there's something inherently wrong with them as a person, like that it isn't just that I've made this mistake. It really is internalized to be I am this failure. I am broken.
Right. So, what do we want to talk about today? We want to talk about all the stuff you do right. More than likely, we're willing to bet money on it that you're doing a lot of stuff right. And we want to start talking about how this is a mindset issue, that you think you can't stay on track. You think it's all some big problem with you when, again, willing to bet money, you do a lot of stuff right.
Yeah. And probably a lot more things right than you do wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like we have talked about it in the past, like your brain developed to keep you safe and to keep you alive. And so what it wanted to tell you about is when there was a problem or when there was something wrong so that you could correct that and stay alive and not get eaten or walk off a cliff or anything that you might want to do. So your brain is like, okay, here's the problems and that's what we need to fix. It's not telling you all the things you're doing right because it's like, we don't have to work on those. But when you're dealing with mindset issues, you really have to start to train your brain to look for all those things that you're doing right.
Exactly. And it doesn't help that we live in a culture that has picked up on that to sell stuff. So commercials for products that, might like skincare or makeup or really anything. Cars make you more beautiful. Beer makes you more beautiful and skinny. Like commercials will try to tell you that everything's going to be perfect if you buy whatever they have. And they'll use a lot of imagery and they develop a script and a scene. They hire the right models. They airbrush everybody to perpetuate this idea that if you're not like that, that, there's a problem here and you need to fix it.
Yeah. So how do you combat that? Like, how do you deal with it in relation to what we're talking about with is food and being making the choices that you want to make to reach the goals that you want to reach? We believe that it starts with data. And when it comes to I'm broken because I ate um, too many chips, too many cookies, fried chicken and mashed potatoes, when what I really wanted to have was, or my intention was that I would only have grilled chicken and steamed broccoli. So it's this idea that because I'm not doing what I want to do, everything that I do is wrong. So we just put a big blanket of wrong on it. And what helps you with that is data. And the way that you collect data is a food plan. Food plan, food plan, food plan.
Yes. So a food plan, if you're not familiar with what that is when you prepare every morning, or it could be the night before, but on a daily, in a 24-hour cycle, you're planning for your next day, really the whole day. And what this does is it helps you set your intentions. It helps you figure out, are you shopping correctly and keeping the right things in your pantry and refrigerator? What you'll find when you start food planning is you really need to stay stocked with certain things, like go-to foods that help you quote unquote stay on track. And a food plan allows you maybe to plan in a Dorito or two or one Oreo or some of your favorite foods in a way where you can start to figure out if that actually works for you, to plan in some fun foods, we would call them, where they're fun. They maybe don't have a lot of nutritional value, but maybe in moderation, you could have some of these things. And if you put it into your plan, and you ate them, that's not a failure. You're not going off track. And you can kind of normalize some of what American life offers, which is a lot of packaged foods that we're not advocating for eating packaged foods, but we know the average American woman is subjected, those are presented to her all the time, on a road trip. That's all you can find in a truck stop, gas station. So you need to figure out with a food plan, how can I reach my goals each day, like a calorie goal or a protein goal or whatever it is you're tracking? How can I hit my goals and account for this fact that there exists this thing in our culture, stuff that's shoved in our face all the time that has, sugar in it or salt in it or whatever it is, could be bread. How do you deal with that and not feel like a failure all the time? Because I think diet culture, your own history has shown you that you're going to eat those things. Like those things are in the world. So how can you set your mindset in a way so that you're not pathologically broken and bad, or you don't have any willpower, or you have just poor character flaw? How can we help you show yourself that you are actually really good at stuff? You're good at monitoring your food. You're good at doing the grocery shopping. You're probably most of the day eating stuff that's really good for you. It's just there are these other things that crop up, like the Oreos. And, how do you move through that moment, whether you eat it or not, without beating yourself up?
And I think the food plan, what it does is if you go back at the end of the day, or when you sit down just to do your next day's food plan, and you just kind of say, oh, well, I was planning on doing this, but I did this instead. Often you'll find if you put those things on your food plan, you don't eat them. Like I know that can really happen for me. It's like, oh, I'm going to go to this event and I know it's going to be dinner and dessert and drinks. So I'm going to plan that I'm going to have some of those. And then I get there and it's like, I didn't even have a drink. It's like, I was like, my dinner was so delicious. I didn't even have dessert. So it really is interesting. But what the food plan will show you is what really happened, not what your brain is telling you happened. The food plan is going to highlight those moments when you're like, oh my gosh, I always mess up when I do this, or I always, overeat when I go to my friend's house or something, because maybe it happened one time. And so your brain is looking for all of the evidence that has happened. So it's like every time you do it, even if 10 times you and your girlfriend go out to eat and 9 times you do exactly what you wanted to do and ate exactly the way you wanted to eat, your brain is still looking for that time when you messed up, because you have told your brain you're going to mess up all the time. And your food plan becomes the proof that you aren't broken, that you aren't messing up, that I always do this, or I never can do this, is probably not really true.
Yeah, so let's talk some real life stuff here, Mimi. So my daughter got married this weekend and Mimi was invited to the festivities. There's a lot of, drinking and food consumption with a wedding. So how did you approach this weekend and how do you think you did?
I did really well because they served pizza,
Yeah.
which is like my most favorite of foods. And so I was like, I'm just going to fix my plate and that's going to be my dinner. So I was super excited that it was a thin crust. What's it called? Like flame.
Brick oven.
Yeah.
Pizza.
In
Yeah.
the flame brick oven, which is just like my ideal pizza. And it had a salad. So like I filled the bulk of my plate with the salad. I got my 2 pieces of pizza and I did not walk back up for more.
Yeah.
So I just said, like, I'm just going to have my serving and let that be that.
Mm-hmm. And how did you handle like alcohol consumption? Like, how did you approach that?
Well, I had just said I'm going to have a good time and have drinks, and I did.
Okay.
I knew I couldn't drink too much because I had an hour drive home by
Yeah,
myself.
right. So
So
you
I'm
had
like, the
like a
fact that I
limit,
had to drive in itself was a limiting factor. But
right?
I also like, these are special moments, right? To be included in that day with all of those beautiful young people. And I'm like, I'm not going to go there and the whole time be worried about what I consume
Right.
and what I have. Like, I'm going to go there and I'm going to have a really grand time.
Yeah. Good.
How did you handle it?
And we did a lot of dancing, so there was some
We
exercise,
did
but
a lot of dancing.
we did a lot of dancing. Um, so I brought a cooler. The plan was, yesterday was the actual wedding, and the plan was that I would if you're watching us on YouTube, a whole bunch of, we're not even sure why this is happening on Zoom. All these balloons just floated by my head when I said that. We don't know why. So anyway, sorry for those of you just listening. But it was very distracting. So I took a cooler with some stuff that I usually need to stay on track. I didn't know exactly what food they would be serving through the day because I had to show up early in the morning to get my hair done, my makeup done. And then really the wedding wasn't until late afternoon. So I just wasn't sure what the day would be. So I brought some stuff. So I knew I had what I needed if I needed it. But as it turned out, I was so in the moment of what was going on for my daughter. I was trying to help take pictures. I was helping her with her dress. I was helping do other things and talking to people, getting to know some people who are there. And I found that by the time we reached dinner time after the ceremony, I had not eaten very much at all and actually needed to eat. So with the pizza, I definitely just, gave myself 2 slices and salad. And and even there at dinner, it was hard for me to find time to take enough bites. So, I hadn't planned to have a plan. The only thing I did that was sort of a plan was to bring what I would need if I needed it.
Yeah, that's a good plan.
Yeah.
Be prepared, being prepared. That's what you were talking about with the food plan too, right? It's like when you're
Mhm.
making your food plan, because I think the hardest thing about eating and what can often make us feel like we're broken is when you just start scrounging for
Mhm.
food, because often the quickest and easiest food to eat is
Right.
things that are pre-prepared and the food plan. And it takes a little bit of time to sort of figure out how your food plan is going to work and what you're going to do
Mhm.
with it. I always say just start with like one meal. Like I'm only going to work on planning lunches and get really good at that and then build from there.
Yeah, and this is where we get to the heart of, I don't know if it's American culture, I don't know what it is, but we are so perfectionistic in our culture, I think. And so this idea that that you're just not perfect and you're reaching for this thing called perfection. I think in our programs we would be working with you to how can we shift your perspective away from perfectionism and still succeed beyond anything you've ever been able to do before. And people think, but those two things just don't even, you have to be a perfectionist to get what you want. But for anybody in our group, if you're listening to us, it has not worked for you. So, try. And actually science is starting to show that when you're hard on yourself and trying to reach some, level of perfection, and then you don't, and then you beat up on yourself, that actually is likely to make you fatter. So if your issue is weight gain and wanting to lose weight or maintain a weight loss, the harder you are on yourself. And if your thoughts have to do with how you just never can stick to anything and you never do that and you always do that and all this negative stuff, you're far more likely to gain more weight and not be able to take it off, unfortunately. So a mindset shift is really where you want to be looking right now. If you've been kind of a lifetime cycle of diets and ended up in our group listening to us, we're here to tell you mindset is the way to go. I mean, yes, you do. We have a food plan and we work with you on how to make that actually function for the rest of your life. So it is about food, but it's really retraining your brain. How do you approach food? And this idea of being a detective is kind of where we are, is you have to be your own detective at all times. What am I doing at what times? What did I do? Checking reality against some data, and I think a lot of times you'll see you actually eat quote unquote right most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so. I think part of the thing, just when you were talking about culture, our culture also is not geared for us to celebrate ourselves.
No.
So if you chose to listen to this podcast, you probably need to start giving yourself more credit for being amazing and for the things that you do right. And you probably need to start learning some of those mindset tools that Lee was talking about and practicing them like crazy. I think we had a whole podcast on your mindset is the number one thing. So we'll link to that in the show notes to go back and listen to that. It's not just like, oh, I've thought this now and I want everything to be fixed. You really do have to start practicing those mindset tools. And when you were talking about being a detective, it just reminded me of a Ted Lasso quote. If you don't know who Ted Lasso is, I don't know where you've been in the world, but that show was amazing. I think it's on Apple. I think it's an Apple TV show. So if you haven't seen it, go. But one of the things there, I mean, there's so many Ted isms that come out of it. But one of my favorites is his be curious, not judgmental. And he was referring to it, and for other people and talking about other people doing it. But if you can turn that lens on yourself, that like, if I can get curious about myself and not judgmental on myself, that opens up that kind of student mind and detective brain that Lee was talking about. That if you can really get kind of curious about what you're doing, why you might feel like you're broken, and start to ask questions. But questions can be tricky because we can tend to just ask ourselves, yes, no questions and stuff, but you want questions that really start to open you up and make you think about the actions that you're taking and the thoughts that you're having. Is that kind of where you were going, Lee, with the whole be curious, be a detective?
Yeah. So there's some things required, some new things maybe for a lot of people that are required if you want to start shifting your mindset and your approach to this curiosity mind rather than a judgmental mind. The first thing that to develop, and it's okay if you don't feel like, patience is the first thing to develop. It's something you're going to be working on if you're working with us and shifting your mindset. It's cultivating some patience inside with yourself and this process of learning a new way to deal with food. And I am notoriously not patient. Like, I am not a patient person, but I've cultivated patience. I've cultivated patience with myself and with the process of learning how to eat in a way that feels sane and gives me what I want, nutritionally, and in terms of, my ideal weight for myself. So patience is something to realize it's important to cultivate. And then there's some other things that are really typical for people, like viewing food as an all or nothing endeavor, or dieting, and this thing called a diet where you restrict, and then if you're not restricting, you must be broken or not be able to do something. And then Mimi was talking about practicing this patience and non-judgmental attitude, or you could call it compassionate attitude toward yourself, instead of being, saying mean things about yourself to yourself. Listening to hunger cues. That's a big deal. Like, that's an important one, is understanding what is true hunger. When I felt it yesterday at the wedding, I realized, I'm like, my midsection just hurts. And I was so in the moment, so focused on, my daughter and her new husband and all the stuff, all the pieces that I needed to think about. I had forgotten to eat. I wasn't even drinking water. And so my stomach, my midsection was just aching, and I couldn't figure out what it was. I'm like, why does my stomach hurt so much? I'm like, oh, that's hunger. That's actual hunger. Because I literally had not had much to eat. And that's something that takes some patience and practice too. and a food plan to start to notice what is boredom eating, what's emotional eating, and what's true hunger. And that's something that just takes some time to develop.
Yeah. And those are the kind of questions that you want to be asking yourself, right? Like, am I listening to my body's hunger cues? And I think if you start to think, I don't know. I know it was like, I did a
Yeah.
program one time, and the first thing you had to do was like, start to pay attention and learn what a hunger cue is, because, we're just surrounded by food all the time. And,
Mhm.
we could say like, oh, I'm starving, but it's like, well, let me just stop back and really think, am I really starving? And, all of this again is just that being curious, that collecting data, and trying to figure out, because if you're stuck in a mindset that is negative and seeing what's wrong, it's hard then to start paying attention. So that's, I think, a really good um, question. I think another really good question when you're trying to get curious and figure this out is, how can I practice self-compassion when I view myself as broken or failing or, off plan or off track, which is what we hear. It's like, well, what can I do? How can I go
Mhm.
about this in a different way? What would be better than beating myself up? What are some other things that I can do and think that would be
Yeah.
helpful?
A coaching tool for that is actually using something like a food plan where you become a detective, because a detective is supposed to be objective, or a scientist is supposed to be objective. And going into more of a neutral stance, just removing the negativity first, it's like a pathway toward compassion. So the more you can just observe and just remove the judgment, just moving into that observational neutral position in your thought process is a doorway to compassion. So you're just, by doing that food plan alone, you're moving toward, even though it may not seem like it, you're actually making it a lot easier to be compassionate with yourself and more patient. I wanted to talk about just some specifics, because when people talk about being broken, sometimes we'll say, well, what do you mean? Like, what is broken? Or when you say you're off track or you're failing on your food plan or whatever, what do you mean? And sometimes people will be like, well, I mean, I did okay, like I hit my protein, I hit my calorie level for the day, but I had, 8 Doritos at night. And so we're sitting there waiting for like the big news about where they went off track or where they're broken, and we're like, uh-huh. Mm-hmm. And they're like, yeah, those 8 Doritos. And this is so common, that person's not being stupid or weird. It's very common in our culture to feel like that. So first, that person should not be embarrassed who told us 8 Doritos, because you're just like everyone else. You think if you have Doritos at all, that somehow you're broken, because when you start doing diets, they tell you don't eat stuff like that. So then when you do, you feel bad about yourself. Well, we looked it up. 8 Doritos is 100 calories. Nobody's getting super fat. If they're hitting their calorie goals, or near them, they're having all their protein, nobody's gonna die eating 8 Doritos at 100 calories. Like, that is an okay thing. We're not saying, oh yeah, yay, go out and eat Doritos. We're not advocating for that. But if that's a food that you love and you tend to indulge in, what we would have you do is decide, can you eat them and stop, or is it a trigger food? Or if not, maybe you have your 8 Doritos and you're good. Just don't feel bad about it. That's okay. 2 Oreos. We hear a lot of people like cookies and Oreos. 2 Oreos is a little over 100 calories, not much. It was like 110 calories or something. Nobody's going to die over that. Like, if you can stop at 2 and they're not a trigger food for you, and it's something that you tend to eat and you feel like you're off track with, what's the harm if you're fitting it into your food plan? I mean, you have to have an overall vision, but we would say, if it's not a trigger food, try eating 2 Oreos a day and see how you do. 2 Dunkin' Donut Munchkins, while we were looking at calories, 2 Munchkins, 120 calories. Again, nobody's gonna die over that. 100 and we were looking up garlic knots. It was like, we got different figures, but somewhere between 100 and 120 calories for the average garlic knot. So you can have one if that's something you love. You love bread with slathered in olive oil or butter, sure. Maybe you don't have it every day. I don't know, but it's not, you shouldn't like start beating yourself up.
Yeah. And what I think is interesting when women tell us this, like they're beating themselves, like, oh my gosh, like, I'm such a failure. Like sometimes I'll have like 2 Oreos at night. And I'm like, one, if you can stop at 2 Oreos, like you're doing
That's a great,
amazing, right?
yeah.
I mean, there were years when I would sit down and think, a handful of Oreos and go sit in front of the TV, and when they would come up with these specific things, like, I had 8 Doritos or 3 of these, or, whatever the number is, it's like, I want to say, like, look at how well you are monitoring this and thinking about this and managing this. And so, like Lee said, let's put that in your plan, because the idea of perfectionism is so unattainable. And so if your idea is, I can only be successful if I'm 100%, perfect 100% of the time, then you're feeding your brain the failure message, because it really is. I don't know anybody that's perfect at anything. And I know a lot of amazing people that do a lot of amazing things, but perfectionism is just an ideal that nobody should aspire to. And so
It's
with
like
the
a
idea,
disease. It's like a disease,
yeah,
perfectionism.
yeah,
It's
and
really,
it prevents you from being able to enjoy 2 Oreos.
I,
It's like 2 Oreos might be the most perfect thing for you to eat,
yeah,
like a
yeah,
100-calorie snack. Are there 100-calorie snacks that will be more beneficial? Could it be a fiber and protein snack with just the right smidge of fat? Like, yeah, and probably, you're managing and doing that most of the time. But if
right,
the one
right.
time that you go off track or fail, or break your diet, like the whole idea of breaking it, we don't ever want you on a diet that you feel like you've broken, is
Mhm.
it puts you in that spiral, and then it sets you up for that space where Lee was talking about. When you have those thoughts and that's what you focus on, that's what can then contribute to weight gain instead of weight loss.
Yeah, yeah. And so stick with me here because I'm going to do something that sometimes it's clear to people, sometimes not, but I like to reach for metaphors or analogies. And, we humans are, whether we believe it or not, are a part of nature. We're a part of the planet, just like any tree you walk by, any rock you pick up, any, body of water you look at and the waves coming to shore. We are a part of the planet. And just like those things are. So we're in the realm of nature. And as you may have noticed, if you look at 2 oak trees side by side, you know, they're not carbon copies of one another. They're and you might look at one tree and say, oh, that's a beautiful oak tree. And then you look at its neighbor and you're like, that's also a beautiful oak tree. If you look carefully, they're totally different. And you would never, I mean, I think most people would not point to the one on the left and say, that one's broken because it's not quite as tall and it leans slightly to the left. You wouldn't talk about oak trees that way, parts of nature, just like us. If you hold 2 rocks in your hand, you say, this one here in my right hand is off track, it's a failure. 2 waves coming to shore, that last one was a real dud. I mean, maybe if you're a surfer, but you're meant to be unique and have unique days, unique moments in time. There are days when maybe, like Mimi said, the best thing you could reach for is those 2 Oreos. Yesterday afternoon, that would not have been a bad thing for me because I was actually kind of seriously hungry, and 2 Oreos would have been the perfect thing to have maybe in that moment. And you have natural cycles, just like waves, just like geology, just like trees. You're in your own natural cycles, and there are going to be days when those 8, maybe there are many days you don't need 8 Oreos, you don't even think about them, but the day that you do, what's wrong with that? Don't beat yourself up. It's just a day that you reached for the Oreos. Let yourself off the hook and move on.
Yeah. And I think you counterbalance that with like all of the days that you didn't.
Mm-hmm.
do that. All of the days that you were on track, all of the days where your food plan was beautiful and you stuck to it perfectly, there's probably so many more moments when you're doing things that are right.
Exactly.
Those are the ones that you want to celebrate.
Right. So we just want to re-emphasize as we wrap up today, how important, as you move away from kind of your previous mindset around food, maybe a current mindset about feeling kind of like a failure, like you're always messing up, quote unquote, that a good strategy is to use a food plan, because it puts you, if you go into food detective mode, you're putting on your objectivity hat and your non-judgmental. It's your curiosity hat, as Mimi was saying, and not the judgment hat. And your curiosity hat, when you do a food plan and then you assess it at the end of the day and look backwards, see what happened, you just have all this real data. You start to really see yourself differently. You start to notice that you do have cycles, you do have habits and times of day, and then you just have data you can work with. It's more neutral.
Yeah, I just thought about this. I'm just going to have to get me a weird sticky pad affirmation people, and I have them around. And I think that whole, the Ted Lasso quote, be curious, not judgmental. I think I'm going to put that up on my mirror in the morning. I was like, just think of starting your day, with that mindset and with that openness, like you already are looking at yourself with more self-compassion. You've already slowed down a little bit. And I love it to see it every morning and then to see it again at night when I'm doing my night routine. It's a beautiful idea. And it's hard. I think it will be harder to see yourself as broken and a failure and wrong if what you have in your head is be curious, not judgmental.
And again, just to reiterate on, to say it again, a way to get out of judgment brain to compassion, that middle step is becoming more neutral. So when you have data and you're just analyzing data, it's one step closer to compassion.
Yeah. And it takes time and it takes practice and it takes patience, but
yes,
you are smart. You're listening to this, which means you already are opening up to, learning and being curious. So you really are already on the way.
Exactly. Yay, you. Yay, you. So we have our song. We like to do a song that sums up our podcast just for fun, total fun. And we were Googling like songs about curiosity or songs about, whatever mindset. And so we came up with a song that we were not familiar with by Jack Johnson called Upside Down. And it is just kind of a very positive song about looking outside the box, thinking outside the box. Because in diet mentality and your old mindset, you've kind of gotten yourself into a little box, and it's time to break out of that box and see life in a new way, see yourself in a new way. So we picked that song, and just by chance, the cover of that album has Curious George on the album cover. So there's our word, curious.
It's a good one. So we have a playlist on Spotify, and we'll put the link to that in the show notes too. And we appreciate you listening today, and we will see you next time.
Bye.